Good morning, Common Ground. Man, it's really good to be back in the States. Had a wonderful trip, and I'm very excited to be back joining you guys on this small group Sunday. Thank you for your flexibility. I know this is a bit different, but we want to make sure that our fifth Sundays are something unique, special, and intergenerational. And we also want to make sure that we interrupt ourselves a lot because we don't want to become dependent on what we've always done, especially when the things that we've always done are just cultural, they're just tradition. They're not necessarily even biblical, or sometimes the things we do aren't actually that helpful. But we're trying to return this Sunday to an idea of house churches, just as it was at the beginning. When the first churches began in the book of Acts, it was a bunch of smaller house churches. So today, we're going to try that. We're going to see what it's like to just meet and commune as families together, talking about the Lord together. And what a better topic to discuss than the discussion of celebration, the spiritual discipline of celebration, the way that we're going to end our study of Richard Foster. Now, the spiritual disciplines are underpinned by the discipline of celebration. At least that's what Richard Foster says. And it's because we receive joy from celebration. And the Bible tells us that the joy of the Lord is our strength. So the way that we have the strength to complete all of these other disciplines and to endure for a lifetime of following Jesus as his disciple is to regularly practice the discipline of celebration, to receive that joy, to have that fun. But for the Western church, this can be a little bit uncomfortable. You know, I'm a Westerner, I'll admit it, I'm an American, and I like things to be neat. I really like it when I'm in control. And I really like it when I can manage what other people think about me, if that makes sense. And I really enjoy reverent moments of worship where we're quiet before the Lord. I like the disciplines of stillness and solitude and silence where we can just be reverent, even our worship, to remember that we're before a king. But we also have to remember that this same King, Jesus, also threw one of the best parties when he made the water into wine. When we return to heaven, one of the first things we're going to do is called the marriage supper of the Lamb. Jesus said that I will not eat of this food or drink of this wine until I eat it with you in paradise. That's one of the first things we're going to be doing is at the marriage supper of the Lamb. We're going to have a party. We're going to have a celebration when we get to meet with Jesus again. And one of the ways that can be hard for us is that it means that we're not in control. It means that we're asked to be a little silly. It means that, someone might think something of us if we're having too much fun, that we're irreverent or we don't care much about God, that we're not too serious. But I like to think of David as he danced before the Lord. It offended his wife, Michal, because he danced in an inappropriate way. But he responds to her that he was just overjoyed with the love of the Lord, and he didn't really care what people thought. He didn't care if the party went on time, if it went over budget, if others were questioning his motives. Instead, he knew that he got to celebrate the goodness of God and the goodness of our community together. And so he danced before the Lord. And that's a big challenge for me as a Westerner, is knowing that I'm not so much in control. There might be food on the ground from the kids. I might go over budget. I don't know when they're going to leave my house so I can go to sleep. But we get to instead just be free to let go and to celebrate the things that God has done in our life. In fact, God commanded many celebrations in the Old Testament, many feasts, because he knew it was important for us to remember the good that God has done and to celebrate so we would have the joy and the strength to continue following him. So, 3 questions of why we don't practice the discipline of celebration very often. The first one is that we've already talked about. It can be a bit uncomfortable. It's not very rules based. There's not a clear pattern on how we're supposed to do it. Therefore, we want to make sure that we keep things neat and tidy, and it can be a bit uncomfortable to practice the discipline of celebration. Now, the second one is what's really hard for me, is that the discipline of celebration is at odds with envy. The Bible tells us to mourn with those who mourn, but it also tells us to rejoice with those who rejoice. I find for myself it's easier to mourn with those who mourn than it is to rejoice with those who rejoice, especially if they're rejoicing in something that I wish that I had. So, for example, when Stephen Curtis Chapman lost his daughter in a terrible accident, many people were very quick to say, to mourn with them and to talk about how difficult that must be to lose your daughter. But when Stephen Curtis Chapman makes a lot of money or has a lot of awards, are we quick to celebrate God's goodness in his life too? Especially if maybe you wanted to be a musician as well. To see the success of someone else, it can be kind of hard to celebrate with them. But can we celebrate the goodness of God in someone else's life when we feel that things are hard in our life? Is that possible? Or does it lead us to a state of envy? Rather, in humility, it is a biblical command for us to rejoice with those who rejoice. The third reason that it can be a bit hard is that sometimes we honestly just feel we don't have anything to celebrate. I think this is a really, really sad place to be in, and one that I was in myself. When Deborah and I were first married, we put our hearts and our minds and our efforts together to eliminating every problem we had in our life. We thought that if we worked hard enough, we could have a good life, and that good life comes from eliminating all of the bad. If we saved enough money, if we learned how to have a good relationship, if there was enough food on the table, blah, 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 if only the bad was eliminated, then we would have a good life. We quickly realized that that's not how life works. Instead, life, as Deborah says, is an ongoing relationship between good and bad things. And we have the choice to focus on what we want to focus on. And the spiritual discipline of celebration reminds us to focus on the good that God has done, because at any moment in any one of our lives, God is doing a great work in us. Recently, just a few days ago, I returned from a trip to Asia, and we decided as a team that our goal for the trip was to practice the discipline of celebration. And let me tell you, almost nothing went right on the trip. We never followed the schedule. There was money issues, there was tummy issues from the foods that we were eating. In fact, when we returned to the airport to leave, our flights had been canceled due to the plane crash and the ongoing wars, and we had to stay an additional 2 days in the country, something none of us were planning on, and we had to continue to adjust. But we started to decide that we're going to look at the good. We're going to focus on what's happening that's well, and we're going to celebrate. And what ended up happening was we had 2 days paid for by the hotel, by the airline, to be in a luxury hotel. We were on the 12th floor in the middle of a beautiful city, sitting in a pool overlooking this massive historical city that was for free because of the hardship of us not getting to see our family, not getting to go home when we wanted. So in that, there was a mix of good and bad. We decided we're going to focus on the good. We made it home, everybody's safe, and we had now a cool memory to share as a result of that. So as a church, we need to commit to practice the celebration of discipline, the discipline of celebration, regularly, because it'll give us the joy that God has for us. It'll help us recognize the abundant life He's already given us, and that will strengthen us to continue to endure the parts of life that aren't so good. And if we're honest with ourselves, the church has the greatest reason on earth to celebrate. Tim Keller says that we should throw the wildest parties because we are so in love with God, because we're so excited that our sins have been forgiven. We're so hopeful that we're going to be reconciled with the Father, that we will be given new life. We're so overjoyed by the fact that all this suffering we're experiencing is temporary because of Christ's sacrifice. What a great thing to rejoice. What a great thing to rejoice. When my favorite soccer team finally won this summer their first trophy that they've won in 17 years, there were hundreds of thousands of folks that flooded into the streets and celebrated at the parade. But our King has had victory, and we should flood the streets and celebrate with the parade as well for the great work that our King has done. So now we're going to take some time for you guys to go back into your groups and discuss the study guide of what Richard Foster has to say about the discipline of celebration. Thanks so much.